This is a strange journey. It's time to enter the buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as...
Matthew Polly was a professional computer programmer turned author, but the subject of his first book, The Murder of Time, is his own story as the subject of MKUltra mind control programming. He's joining us today to discuss it. Matthew, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Sean.
Well, absolutely. Let's try to unwrap this, as you call it, the murder of time. So obviously, this is going to go in and out of time. It's a big story to tell, but where does it begin? Where does this mind control experiment begin in your life?
Sure. Just at the 100,000 foot level, in 1945, 1,000 Nazi Germany scientists in mind control and rocket science, so 500 of each, entered the U.S. in the CIA's Project Paperclip. Bit of background there. Now, in my life, when it started, was in November of 2005, when I was coerced into a 5-ton Canadian military vehicle, plate 250002, and that, in fact, plate was verified. I verified that with the government. It does match military vehicle. And there was Joint Task Force, which is the Americans who run Guantanamo Bay, and Joint Task Force 2, which is our Canadian Special Forces, doing a Joint Control Unified Command training exercise, which involved coercive interrogation and group infiltration. And I was their test subject for that exercise. And that involved a lot of torture and coercion and like teaching torture techniques. And it also involved mind control, training the Canadian how to do MKUltra, Monarch, sleeper assassin mind control.
Okay, so at that point, did you immediately, once you were abducted, realize that you had been experimented upon or programmed in any way, or at what point did you realize this?
Right. So that was November 22nd. December 22nd, 1 month later, I went to my doctor with my wife because I was having flashbacks to recalling being tortured in a van by government, by military people. And I didn't have, it's interesting, I didn't have the memory of the part that was the mind control part, because that was, I was tortured down until I dissociated. And dissociated means your dominant personality just goes to sleep. And that's a normal human response to excessive trauma, to protect you. And so when that happens, you have amnesia from anywhere from months to years. So it took me 4 years and 5 months before I recalled the mind control training part. And during that time, I had 500 hours of psychotherapy from both a psychiatrist up in Canada, here it was free, and then 250 hours from a private therapist, which I paid for.
Right. So initially you remembered being tortured. You didn't realize that there was a mind control element to it. Now,
exactly.
Now, do you believe that you were selected, pre-chosen when you were picked up, or was it a random decision on their part to put you in this van? Oh,
it was very actually selective. And I know the two reasons they selected me. They had prior knowledge that I had suffered from a severe trauma in my childhood. And that is, in fact, something that they look for. In fact, the American JTF officer, which I call Mitch, he said to me in the van, "Matthew, how was your childhood?" I said, "Well, actually, I had some major traumas." He said, "Yes, I know." He said, "We look far and wide for people like you, Matthew." So that was one of the reasons I was chosen. The other reason I was chosen was that I had said some rather stupid things while being interrogated in the workplace only a few months earlier. Basically, I saw a plane crash at the Air France 358 that crashed in Toronto on August 2nd of 2005. I happened to be across from the airport looking out the fourth floor window, seeing runway 24R and 24L, and I could see that plane go past halfway and land, and rooster tails coming up 150 feet. And anyway, to make a long story short, the plane crashed, and because it disappeared into a gully and smoke started coming up, I didn't know, it looked like they all died. And it took me 4 hours before we knew that they lived. And so in those 4 hours, I had a sort of an event, a pure post-traumatic stress event, where, some people who are in planes that crash get PTSD, some of us who have a childhood of a lot of psychological traumas, all we have to do is see a plane crash and we'll dissociate and have a PTSD. And so that's what happened to me. And 2.5 weeks later, on August 19th of 2005, there was a tornado evacuation here in Toronto. A tornado touched down in Fergus, Ontario. And as it came to the building, my team started to evacuate, but the team lead was getting all panicked. And I was arguing with him. I said, look, we shouldn't evacuate everybody here, not just our team, because if there's a threat to the building, it's everybody we should be concerned about. And he said, no, we talked to them already. No, and you're on your own. You just say you're on your own. You're on your own. I said, oh, okay, yeah, I'm on my own. And then I stayed, and another guy stayed beside me, and we both went into like under our desks at the same time when the hailstones started hitting the window. It looked like the windows were going to break, and I went into shock. And when I was in shock for about 45 minutes, a guy tried to help me out of there, and he's a hero. He was trying to save my life, and the mistake that he made was he took me to the same stairwell that I had fled after seeing the plane crash, in which I had a PTSD event. And I wouldn't go through the stairwell. And so I went back to my desk the second time. This is a guy in his 70s, late 70s, and I'm 37 or something at this point. And so I guess I'm 39. But anyway, he tried to force me through the stairwell with his arm around my waist and to push me through. And this is one thing you should never do to somebody who's in shock. Never try and physically force them, because they have no brain cells left, right? When you have no oxygen in your brain, you're not rational. So I grabbed him by the lapels and I threw him, which was a horrible, violent thing to do, which I've never done before. Thankfully, he landed on the third stair on his butt, and he only twisted his arm. But the point is, because I had been violent, he felt that I should be interrogated. Well, it turns out this guy was from the Devil's Brigade in World War II. And they got that name because they painted their faces black. They were special ops of the Canadian, American, and British, and they were fighting the Germans. And they did special ops, and the Germans were so afraid of these guys, they called them the Black Devils. And so they took on the name Devil's Brigade. Anyway, so this guy knew interrogation inside out. And so he's interrogating me on a room on another floor that's empty, and he's just got his 200-pound nephew behind him. And because they got me mostly out of shock by rapid massage by the Chinese team of programmers. Anyway, so they're interrogating me down there, and I'm feeling like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to get charged with assault. I'll never work again. So I feel like I got to give him something to distract him from charging me with assault. So I exaggerated my hatred towards a former neoconservative politician 10 years earlier in 1995. And I made it sound like me and my friend were, how shall we say, making plans, which we never did. But I made it sound like that because I was trying to distract him, and I was half rational because I was still partly in shock. Anyway, that got me tagged right there. I was tagged right there as a potential terrorist. And so he reported me to the Department of National Defense and to the RCMP. And then he called me up in October, a few months later, and he said, Matthew, have you been interrogated yet? I said, oh, by whom? And he said, by the authorities. I said, oh, no. And he said, oh, geez, okay, bye, Matthew. Click. 3 weeks later, I had a gas company inspector come with this free energy conservation program. And he was going to give me some aerators for my faucets and look in my furnace room. And I fell for it. And I let him in. And while he's in the furnace room, he asks me to turn on the hot water upstairs in the bathtub. I said, well, there's a bathtub right down here. And he was really disappointed. He's like, are you sure you have a bathtub down here? I said, yeah. And my antenna went up at that point. Why does this guy want to be alone in my furnace room? But anyway, so I played along. I played the hot water for like, 2 minutes or so. Then I came into the furnace room. He's just all finished up, and he's running in a hurry to get upstairs. We go upstairs. He has me sign this invoice for $0 with my signature. It was like white, green, and pink copies, which they later showed me in the van in 2005 in the interrogation, November 22nd. And anyway, so this guy saw 2 bottles of hydrogen peroxide in my basement furnace room. And I didn't know that, but I guess hydrogen peroxide could be made into a weapon or something. And so I was in big trouble.
Basically, they were painting you. They were how do you say it? They were identifying you as a potential terrorist and
Exactly.
finding everything that could be utilized in that operation. Now, oftentimes we see in the U.S.
Exactly.
how stings go down as a result once they get an informant to start baiting you
Exactly.
and goading you along, and next thing you know,
Exactly.
you're entrapped in something. So That's obviously
Exactly.
the sort of the scenario by which they then pick you up for interrogation. Do you remember what kind of interrogation? Was it along those same lines as far as you painting you as a potential
No.
terrorist?
Well, no, this was quite. I mean, if they were really concerned about me being a terrorist, they would have queried me in great detail about this comment that I made about this former premier of Ontario. They didn't. Instead, the first thing they did was they showed me the tools of torture. They showed me this little single-hole puncher with the flange removed for pulling out fingernails, and they inspected every one of my fingernails, one by one, looking to see if they could pull them out. This was to terrify me, of course, and they kept looking at my face to see if I was afraid or not. Then they had me sit down. They did a medical questionnaire. Then they had me sit down in this torture chair with a high back, and it's webbing, seatbelt black webbing, so that you won't get bruised very easy. And the tubing is really large tube, aluminum, so there's no sharp edges. And they clasped me down, handcuffed and leg cuffed. And then they also gave me a 150 cc syringe on this arm of sodium pentothal. And then on this arm, upper right shocking cuff, electroshock cuff with a remote control. And then they taped my eyelids open with medical tape. And it was the RCMP officer who did all this. There was an RCMP officer there who did all this stuff. He was like an expert. I swear to God. I mean, can you imagine taping someone's eyelids open properly without causing them too much pain and doing it so perfectly? Like I got one part, I always, oh, that hurts. Oh, no problem. I'll fix that for you. He just fixed it in like 5 seconds. This guy's obviously taped eyelids for a living.
Clockwork Orange, right?
Yeah. And then 3 bright floodlights in my eyes. And then the interrogation started. Are you a member of Hezbollah? And no. Are you sure? You've never been a member of Hezbollah? No. Do you know anybody who's ever been a member of Hezbollah? No. Next one. Are you a member of Hamas? No, I'm not a member of Hamas. Are you sure you've ever known anybody who's a member of Hamas? No. You know, and this went on. And there was about, I swear, there must have been about 30 terrorist groups. And they were all, of course, a lot of them with Arabic names. I had no idea I even heard of them before. And then there's some interesting ones. PETA. Are you a member of PETA? I said, you mean People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals? They said, yes. No, I'm not. I wasn't aware that was a terrorist organization. And then they asked, are you a member of the White Panthers? White Panthers? I thought it was Black Panthers. No, there's White Panthers now. Oh, well, no, I'm never, if you remember any society whatsoever, any
it's almost like it sounds like a joke at this point. It just seems
I know,
like they're going through a checklist of things they have
like
to ask you.
It was obvious there was a training exercise.
Right.
It was a training exercise. So this is what they planned to do, right? Because this guy that was teaching was the Joint Task Force guy, and he's from they run Guantanamo Bay, right? And what do they have there? A bunch of Arabs, right? So these are all geared towards an Arab interrogation. Then they asked me, have you ever been a member of any political parties? And I said, I was a member of the Liberal Party of Canada once. And the JTF2 guy looked at me really seriously and said, is that supposed to be a joke? And I said, no, it's the truth. I'm just telling you the truth. I was a member of the Liberal Party once. And I said, I was a member of the NDP once, too. NDP is our left party. And he said, now we're getting closer, right? and then they got weird, because then they started torturing me for no reason at all.
What kind of torture? Are we talking Marathon Man?
Well, okay, first of all, there's the electroshock cuffs, so I'm getting zapped when I don't answer a question fast enough. And then the American was teaching the Canadian no scar torture. So here's several no scar tortures. One of them is they close my eyes, and then they take a finger and they flick the eyeball like that. And the eyeball goes back into the back of the head, and it's extremely painful. Another one is they take the first knuckle, or the first joints on the fingers, and then while you clench your teeth together, they grind this in here like this. And what that does is it causes the mucous membranes of your mouth to be scrunched by the crowns of your teeth. And it's very painful. Of course, there was face slapping. And what else? Oh, I got my arm dislocated, my shoulder dislocated by the JTF officer, which frankly was the most painful thing. It was really bad.
Yeah. Well, that oftentimes happens just during basic arrests when the police are the manhandling people. But the point being that in the course of this torture, you at some point dissociated, correct?
Correct. Well, it's interesting. After he went through the standard of teaching him all these different torture techniques to the Canadian. Then he switched into this mind control stuff. And here's how it happened. He started asking me this question: what is your Arabic name? And of course, I don't have an Arabic name, right? But it's a nonsensical question. There's no right answer. I would say, no, I don't have an Arab name, and they shock me. And then I'd say, oh, okay, my Arabic name is Mohash, because that's the one they told me my name in Matthew translates to in Arabic to Mohash. So I say Mohash, and then nothing would happen. And then ask me again, and I'd say, okay, Mohash, and I get a shock. So what it was non-predictable shocks. No matter what your answer is, or if it's correct or it's incorrect, or if it's just no answer, you'll get random electric shocks. And something happens to the mind when you're getting random electric shocks or random pain. What happens is you start to literally just regress to this small child, infantile place. And I remember the American saying to the Canadian, you see how he's flickering against he's flickering against the taping of his eyelids right now, constantly flickering? He said, that's one of the signs. The other sign is, watch this. And he puts his hand between the spotlights in my face, and I cringe in the chair like this, or as much as I can, because I'm restrained. I cringe like this. He said, that's another sign. Now, they've got to be careful. They go into shock at this point. Matthew, don't breathe faster, or breathe slower. Don't go into shock. And so I started breathing slower. So what I had gotten to in this little small, frightened little animal state was actually dissociation. My dominant personality had gone to sleep, and what was left over was this infantile, very malleable personality, which then the American JTF guy, Mitch, proceeded to get me to repeat 3 fatal post-hypnotic suggestions.
Okay, now, the subtitle of your book, The Murder of Time, is called The Making and Unmaking of a Sleeper. Correct?
Yeah, making and unmasking. Yeah.
Making and unmasking of a sleeper. So now, how does this obviously is part of what the triggers mean? Why don't you explain a bit of what the sleeper means? The sleeper, as far as the audience is concerned, what does that mean, a sleeper?
Sure. Basically, it's a person that is, let's use the word sleeper assassin for the phrase sleeper assassin to start with. And then I'll explain what super soldier is. Super soldier is like a Venn diagram. Sleeper assassin is a large Venn diagram circle. And then inside of that is a smaller circle of super soldiers. Okay? So the larger context of what is a sleeper assassin is somebody who's been conditioned through torture to dissociate, and while they've been dissociated, they've been hypnotized, and they've been forced to repeat post-hypnotic suggestions. And these post-hypnotic suggestions, you repeat like a dozen times in a row in the first person. And then you have one at the end that you repeat, which says, I will never remember this suggestion until the trigger is present. And you have to repeat that like 5 or 10 times. So basically, now your subconscious mind has this program that you cannot remember because you've repeated a post-hypnotic suggestion to not remember it until the trigger is present. Now what happens is when you come out of that dissociation state and now you're back to normal, you have missing time. That's why I call the book The Murder of Time. You have missing time for that entire dissociative event period. You have no memory of it. I mean, literally in 2007, I was abducted for 12 hours. And when I was brought back to my home and I was told to go to sleep, Matthew, like a van pulled out front and took me home, I had been basically abducted across international borders. And they told me what to say to my brother-in-law as to why I had been out all night and stuff. And they said, go to sleep, Matthew, don't go to work. And I said, should I call? No, don't call in sick. They'll know you're sick. Don't call. So the next day I sleep all day. I go to work the next day. This is in 2007, Q3. My team leader, I sit down beside my team leader because we have these pod arrangements at this very, very Silicon Valley software shop. And my team leader is really pissed at me. And he goes, Matthew, next time you're going to be away for a day, at least send me a bloody email. And I had no memory of being away for a day. As far as I knew, the previous day I was at work programming. I had no memory of having missed a day. So anyway, getting back to your question, a sleeper assassin is someone who's been programmed through hypnosis. And most often that involves being torture trauma dissociated. And thirdly, when that person is exercised in a violent event, they will usually be drugged with a high dose of scopolamine. Scopolamine is from the deadly nightshade family of plants. It's from Colombia, and NASA has recently gotten in the game of scopolamine. In 2013, NASA decided to develop an aerosol version, because it's a dust, right? Mm-hmm. They decided to develop an aerosol version. And now you have to ask yourself, how could this possibly be useful for space research? And the answer is absolutely nothing to do with space research. Because can you imagine if you sprayed an aerosol in zero gravity of a mind control drug? You'd wipe out your whole crew, right? It would be a disaster. So the only reason they did this is because back in 1945, as I mentioned at the outset, 500 rocket scientists from Nazi Germany and 500 mind control scientists were brought into America, and the rocket scientists went to NASA. Mm-hmm. So then those guys, right? You got a huge seeding of Nazism in that organization, and also in the U.S. military and the CIA, where the other mind control guys went. And so basically, it's these bunch of Nazis helping these bunch of Nazis. That's what it amounts to. So in 2014, interesting, guess who got to be the tester for the fog or aerosol version of scopolamine? Me.
Really?
Yeah.
How so?
On June 21st of 2014, I was lured out of my house by a voice-to-skull transmission, which is basically microwaves that are sent to you to actually to a particular point right beside you. And what happens is the interference between the two microwave signals stimulates the cochlea in your ear, and you hear precisely what the person is saying into the microphone. So I'm lying in bed, and my wife's gone to work. It's like 7 in the morning, and he's going, "Matthew, get up, get up. It's time to walk the dog, walk the dog." And I'm looking, like, what's this? You know, and I look at the window. The window's open this much. How is it that I can hear this voice so perfectly? So I thought, okay, this is weird. Something's going on here. I better investigate. Bad move. So I take my dog out, and I just go not even 100 meters away on the street. And I'm lured by this voice that keeps calling. Anyway, finally got led into a trap. There was Mitch, the JTF2 officer, behind a fake bush. I swear to God, it was like 8 or 10 feet long, fake bush, 3 feet high, mounted on a board. And he suddenly did a military roll into a crouching position. And he was right in front of me. And he had this black hose with a fire extinguisher nozzle, and this fog starts coming out at me. And all this fog, and he stands up and he walks over the fake bush. He actually caught his boot in the bush for a minute, but he got it out. And then he stepped over it, and he's fogging me. This whole fog's all over me, and I just stand there, and I'm in shock almost. I'm stunned. I'm holding my breath, and then it goes down like this, and now all of a sudden I see him, and there it is. He's the same body shape as Mitch, and he's got a gas mask on, and he's all black. And so my first words were, "Thanks," sarcastically. And that he doesn't like that. He's a sadist. He can't stand people talking back to him. He stepped back from the fog, pulled off his gas mask, and said, "Anytime, Matthew." Like that character in Seinfeld says, Newman says, "Hello, Jerry." It was just like that. And so anyway, I had about 7 seconds before I was unconscious. So I managed to start running away to the most public area of grass I could get to. And I couldn't breathe. And I collapsed and I went unconscious. And that happened 3 times. I awoke the first time because my dog was licking my lips and my nose, just like a mother dog does to her puppies to get them to breathe at birth. And I actually started to breathe, but then I went under again. Now, next time I came up.
But when Devil's Breath's activated, the point is that they call it the zombie drug because really you can be programmed in that time period to do almost anything. People have talked about being robbed or raped when they're drugged by scopolamine. Do you have any recollection of what you did in that time period after you were drugged?
Oh yeah, I've been hit with scopolamine between 3 and 4 times now. Now that scopolamine fog test, the dosage was too high to actually use me to get me to do things because I was basically on the verge of death. They were actually testing to see if it would kill me because they obviously want to use it as a crowd suppressant. So you get a bunch of peaceful activists who are marching in front of some Capitol building in Washington, and they just blast them out with this fog, and they all fall to the ground. And then they'll have no memory when they wake up of what's going on, and they'll do exactly what they're told. as I did. When I finally woke up the third time, a guy says, I think you should go home and rest now. And I said, okay. And I went home and I lied down and I rested. And so you'll do whatever you're told when you're high on scopolamine.
Mm-hmm. Now,
anyway, so,
okay.
But I think your question was, do I remember anything that actually they were designing me to do something with scopolamine? And yes, I do remember. Do you want?
Sure.
All right. So in 2007 Q3, but first of all, 2006 Q3, I'd done the first version of my book, and I got a snatch and grab on King Street in Toronto, which was a major street, and this was about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and the theaters we have Broadway-style theaters there, and the lines, people had gone in for the early show, and there was nobody on the street really, and there was 5 people involved in this. It was very sophisticated. And one guy walked towards me. I'm in a suit, he's in a suit, and he keeps cutting me off. And I keep getting closer and closer to the van as we're both walking towards this van. Finally, I'm within 2 or 3 feet of the van as I'm walking by. And I heard my name being called. I look over to the passenger side just after I passed the passenger side of the van. And there I see the outline of Blondie, or Mitch. I used to call him Blondie, but he made me change that. So anyway, Mitch, and then I heard a click. And I had no time to even turn around. It was the side door clicking. Next thing you know, I'm in a headlock from behind, and I got a rag, an inhalant-soaked rag over my mouth. I was pulled back into this thing. I was unconscious. I awoke. There was the American JTF officer, Mitch, and there was Burley, the RCMP officer, and they proceeded to tell me, Matthew, you've been a bad boy. You've been talking about what's been going on, what happened in the 2005 event. And I had a ball gag in my mouth, so I couldn't talk, and I was strapped to a gurney, a low gurney in this ambulance-type van. And they said, Matthew, we warned you. You weren't supposed to talk. And then they put on this headset, and they gave me forced ECT. And it was so bad that afterwards, when I woke up, I was on a bench, and Mitch was punching my shoulder. Matthew, wake up, wake up. And so I did, and he said, so do you know where you are? I said, yeah, I'm in the back of a van. Good. He says, do you know where you're going? And I said, yeah, I'm going to home. And he said, good. And the RCB officer said, where's your home? And I said, 400 Walmer Road. Well, I hadn't lived there for 6 years, right? So they had done so much powerful ECT on me that I didn't even know where I lived. And that did stop my book. Now, moving along, in 2007, there was another snatch and grab, and this is one where I was working on King Street for a big software company, and they were actually foreign exchange trading. And I went to the elevator about 8 o'clock at night, and the doors opened, and there was 3 guys in dark suits. I mean, they were all identical, all athletic, all within a certain, height range, and dark sunglasses on. And had I the martial arts training that I have now, I would never have gotten that elevator. But I decided to, I wasn't going to escape anyway, so I might as well just get in. And that was a big mistake. So the doors close in the elevator, the lights go off, and then within 1 second I'm hit with a needle here, and I'm unconscious. And then I woke up in a van in the United States of America. And the reason I know it was the United States of America was, in addition to Mitch, which was the American JTF2 officer, there were 2 other American accented officers. 3, the humidity was quite different than Toronto. 4, the vegetation growth, the state of growth of the vegetation for that time of year was way more advanced, more lush than it would be in Toronto. I mean, this was south, quite a ways south of Toronto. And this was my test. You see, this is a good point to introduce something here. The Canadians, since 1940, when there was an agreement signed between the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the OSS, which was the CIA precursor, they signed an agreement to develop better assassins. And this was published in the Ottawa Citizen newspaper in 1940. So what's the role here? As I figured this out, being in this plan now for 10 years, I figured a lot of stuff out. We Canadians are not used for false flag operations in the States. We're used for R&D purposes. We're the guinea pigs up here.
What's RNT?
Sorry, research and development.
Oh, R&D.
Yeah, R&D, sorry. So what happened was I was exercised as a sleeper assassin. And let me tell you the circumstances. In the November 2005 event, I had been sworn by Mitch because he was so upset because the Canadians wouldn't let him take me to Guantanamo Bay because they knew I was not a terrorist. He was so upset that he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I swear you, by the power vested in me, I swear you, an enemy of the people of the United States of America." He says, "I want your name exactly as it appears in your passport." And so he swore me as an enemy of the people of the United States of America, which was like stupid, silly. I'm not a threat to Americans. But anyway, my parents are Americans. Anyway, so when I'm in this 2007 event, I'm first of all tortured in the back of this van that I wake up in. Mitch is dragging a cigarette down my arm really, really slowly. It's a lit cigarette just above a few millimeters, like a quarter of an inch above the skin, eh? And he's moving it really, really slowly, and I'm screaming. And he's going, "Matthew, you know why I move it really slowly?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Because this way, there's no scarring, yet still maximum pain." And he kept going, and within about a minute, I was just screaming in pain, right? And within about a minute, I just dissociated. And once I dissociated, he just says, "Okay, Alpha, remember what I programmed you in 2005, program number 2. There's the target. They're coming along shortly. Remember what I told you to do? You're going to do that now." And so the other guy that was the driver of the van took a walkie-talkie radio, and he went about 100 meters away, or 100 yards away. And he was waiting for the target to come. It's very early in the morning. And I am in there in the van with Mitch, and Mitch says, "Matthew, you stink." And I'm feeling kind of weird about that. I said, "Well, you know, I had a toothbrush, I could brush my teeth." He says, "And Matthew, it's not your teeth, it's the drug." So that's another thing you'll notice in my list of characteristics of a sleeper assassin, is that when they're high on scopolamine, is they smell really bad. Anyway, so he asked the assistant, the one who gave me the needle, to open the sliding door of the van. As soon as he opened the sliding door of the van, I could see the vegetation growth and everything. I realized, oh my God, we're in the U.S. Now, as soon as I stepped out of that van and put my foot on the U.S. soil, I am basically the turkey in a turkey shoot. Mm-hmm. Because I am a sworn enemy of the United States of America, surrounded by special forces of the Joint Task Force with guns. And he actually unholstered his gun and held his gun quite visible. And he said, "You know, you are an enemy." And I said, "Yeah, I know that," because he'd sworn me an enemy. Which means if I didn't do what he said, he could just take me out right now and he'd be a hero.
Right.
Because he's taken out an enemy of the U.S., right? Mm-hmm. So basically, I did what I was told.
Which was?
To take out somebody.
To kill someone?
Yeah.
So you're saying that you forcibly killed someone in the U.S. that was basically there was a target that was designated for you? That's correct.
That's correct.
And this was in the context of an operation, or is this in a city, or is this someone recognizable?
This I had never seen the person. I had no idea who they were. My feeling is that they were probably somebody that was a whistleblower like myself, or someone who had somehow the security establishment of the United States had decided this person was a problem, and this was an extrajudicial murder, and this was run by the JTF. I mean, I didn't have any bloody choice.
Right, but
they had my wallet.
Yeah.
They had my cash.
But why wouldn't they have arrested you on the spot? I mean, when I see you see certain cases like Sirhan, and you say, well, the guy probably was a sleeper assassin in a similar fashion, no? And he got arrested.
No, of course, because he's an American. You see, we Canadians, we're used for R&D. So basically, the whole point of that exercise was to test the programming that I'd gotten 2 years ago. Was it still active? Could they still get me to actually do what they had programmed me to do? Mm-hmm. And then they would write that all up as their MKUltra experiment and saying, yeah, all these various programs that we've done, and this is what's happened in the 2 years. We gave him 4 CCT in the middle to shut him up from doing his book. And anyway, so basically this was an R&D experiment. And that's why I got flown back. I woke up, first of all, they gave me a needle right afterwards in the van, so I went unconscious. Then I wake up in another van in front of my house, and that's where they coached me on what to say.
Well, let me ask you, with all of these things that you recalled, was it recalled immediately, or was it recalled later on in time?
Right. Well, the order of which trauma-dissociated memories are recalled is the order is from least traumatic to most traumatic. So that particular event registered as most traumatic. So it actually took me 3.5 years to start after the event to start having just little flashbacks about it. And then it took a full another 2 years. So at year 5.5, I had full recall of the details.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious, when you see assassins and these lone nut killers in the United States, like James Holmes, for example, and the shooting in Aurora, or these theater shootings recently, or the Sandy Hook kids, or the Boston bombing kids, do you see them and say, they look in their eye, they look like sleeper assassins, they look like they've been drugged and trained and deployed the same way that you were?
The short answer is yes. And in fact, I looked at the video of the Charleston shooter, and there's video of him walking into the police station within a few hours of the event. I mean, I think they stopped and they bought him a hamburger, right? So nice of them to do that.
Yeah, that was weird, right? Charleston was the church shooting in Carolina, where right. Have you ever had a cop buy you some food because you were hungry, let alone for a DUI, let alone for killing people?
No. So anyway, he's walking to the police station. There's cameras everywhere, and you can see him walking towards the camera, and his eyes are, I swear to God, they're blinking slowly like this. Slowly blinking like that. And also his pupils are dilated. Okay? Now, if you look on my crowdsourced site, that's the first actual characteristic I have for how to recognize a sleeper assassin. They have dilated pupils, they have droopy eyelids, and they have slow blinking. That's number C, slow blinking. Very foul, bad breath, and they have heavy legs, loss of strength in the legs, so it's a lot of effort just to stand and walk and run. Heavy head, they might find themselves bobbing in their head when they're sitting. Loss of willpower, they'll do whatever they're told. You have no willpower, including, I think you mentioned, in some countries, if you get hit with scopolamine, they just blow it into your face and then say, let's go to your bank machine. And you withdraw all your money, and they say, yeah, just give it to me. And you just give it to them. You have no willpower. Another thing is you have post-event amnesia. Scopolamine intoxication wipes out amnesia for your memory for 3 to 5 days. Now, I have experience. I'm an actual scientist here, because when they hit me last year with that scopolamine fog test, there was no trauma dissociation, just scopolamine. And that's the only time I had just scopolamine. And it took me between 3 and 5 days to recall the event.
Right.
Anyway, getting back to your question, James Holmes, 100% is an MK Ultra guy. And furthermore, he looks like an MK Ultra patsy, not an MK Ultra shooter. And the reason I say that, okay, first of all, he has super dilated pupils in the video in the courtroom. He's got his head kind of bobbing a little bit, and he looks really confused, and he can't even say his name. He's so blasted on scopolamine, they have to say his name for him. And I mean, it's quite obvious that this guy was an MK Ultra patsy. There was a second gas mask found in that theater. There was another report of another guy there. And the reason why, you can't take a neurology student who's, doing a PhD guy who's a nerd and turn him into a super soldier, overnight. That's not going to work. So it's much better. They had to do something quick because his dad was about to testify before a big banking commission and to unearth all this corruption in the banking business. So they had to quickly do something. So they decided, okay, we'll make him a patsy. And that's what they did. There was a mind controller working on him for a month or two. They got him high on scopolamine, really high. They cut his hair in a bowl shape. They gave him a red dye, and it made him look, like kind of nuts. And then they blamed him for the whole thing.
Right.
And he's innocent.
Yeah. And you can go down the line, I think, from there and just kind of use your. I would tell the audience to use your intelligence when you look at these random lone nut cases, and just use your discernment and be like, how realistic is that? How realistic obviously, yes, there are crazy people in the world, and yet to go up and pick up a weapon, first of all, arm yourself to the teeth like that, go out there and shoot and murder people for no reason whatsoever. Let's start to use discernment here as to what the motivation really might be from a government point of view, from a strategic mind control point of view.
You hit the nail on the head, Sean. That's exactly it. People need to think critically and think who benefits, right? So one week after the Charleston shooting, Hillary Clinton said, this is the problem with free speech. And the implication of that statement is that this guy, this guy in the Charleston shooting, who we know was not a racist 6 months earlier because he has all these black friends on Facebook who say, hey, this guy is a nice guy, he's not a racist. All of a sudden, in the last 2 months, he becomes a racist.
Right.
And I mean, it doesn't fit. And now this thing about the idea is what Hillary Clinton's statement meant was that this is what happens when we have an open and free internet that's not censored, is that the hate groups propagandize people to become terrorists.
Oh yeah, I've even seen reports recently saying, well, conspiracy theorists are more likely to become recruited by ISIS. So you know where this is going. But to get back to your story and to really complete it, I need to understand a little bit. Are you the norm as far as someone who realized that he was being deployed, to realize that he was being messed with as part of a program, and to say, I'm actually working to remember these things? Or is it most likely that people who have been programmed the way you have actually will never remember, or unless they really work on it, they'll never actually remember what they've done and end up becoming sleeper assassins or sleeper patsies?
I think that my case is actually very unique, and that's why I'm here on camera with you now, is I have a lot of resources that a lot of these people that have been put in this program do not have. First of all, being a computer programmer, I made some good money. So I have a little bit of RRSPs, or registered savings plans. I've been able to survive with my wife just working for the last 2 years, although we've been going into a bit of debt on a line of credit in our house. I've spent about $25,000 on therapy. Because I have a university degree in sociology, as well as computer science, I'm able to reasonably articulate my story. And I think that's not something that, in fact, I know it's not, because I've been contacted by half a dozen MK Ultra people in the last year. I swear to God, half a dozen. And I've Skyped with several of them. One of them is a super soldier, a real super soldier, like in the MK Ultra or American Ultra movie. But this is a real guy. And by the way, these are the most tortured and abused people on the earth. Remember I told you about that Venn diagram? So you've got the large circle is the sleeper assassins, MK Ultra sleeper assassins. A smaller circle within that are the super soldiers. Now the super soldiers have been basically since birth brought up by Nazis to be sadists, to basically the Nazis would torture them so that they would develop multiple personality disorder. And instead of having 2 alters, like I have 2 alters, alpha and beta, they might have like 10 alters. And each one of them lives in a little box. And I'm using the words of the super soldier here. They live in little boxes. And he's trying to learn how to get the keys to the boxes so that he can get in them and, deactivate them.
Yeah.
And they're also, in addition, so they have years and years and years of this abuse. And then they go into the military and they learn how to kill people really efficiently. So super soldiers are extremely, everyone thinks that's a horrible, scary thing to have a super soldier. Yes, but it's also a horrible, scary thing that they've done to that person to make them that way.
Right.
So most people, to answer your question, do not have the resources. I am not a typical. My father was a cultural anthropologist and sociologist, and he was a professor. And so I was brought up, to be very, very inquisitive and to figure things out on my own and to, apply strategy. And anyway, I therefore have an obligation. These people have basically told me that I need to get this book out because they can't.
So tell us a bit about the book then. You're working on a Indiegogo campaign right now to help launch it?
Yes, my lucrative Indiegogo campaign. Unfortunately, when people read about it, all I do is I just tell the truth, what's happened just in the last 14 months, and it freaks people out so much that they're scared to donate. That's my biggest problem. But anyway, the reason is I wanted to raise money so that I could hire security guards, because a person who's done a security assessment, an expert in the industry, has said I should have a safe house immediately. They said that a year ago. And so I'm worried that the last month or two on the book here, for my safety. And that's why I was trying to raise money for getting security guards. So the book basically documents since November 2005 what's happened in my life. And my co-author, Ann Diamond, has already written several books on her experience in the early 1950s at the Allen Memorial Institute by Dr. Ewan Cameron, who was CIA funded. And so she also understands this topic very well, and she's going to, polish up my work. So that'll be helpful.
Yeah. So then the book, you're in the final phase of writing it. It would ideally be done in the next month or so?
Yeah.
Now, are you still a sleeper? Can you still be triggered? Or have you been able to diffuse and deactivate the programming that was given to you?
Well, that's a good question. The short answer is I can never be 100% certain because of the nature of these psychological mechanisms we're speaking about. How do I know that I don't have missing time still and that there's something that happened and they programmed me for certain conditions, right? There's a possibility that exists, but I would only put that at about 5 or 10% because I've done so much therapy and so much writing that I've uncovered all of the events and know all of the events, to my knowledge, are all out there. And the other thing is I know what the post-hypnotic triggers are. I've documented them. And so I know when someone says to me certain things, I know my conscious mind goes, holy shit, that person is they're trying to get into my head and trigger something, and I'll just walk away. And that actually happened 2 weeks ago. When the Mossad were trying to get at me, their first approach was to have a hypnotist approach me around the street. And I walked away. And the second approach was the bad one.
How can you be sure it was Mossad?
Oh, because I contacted them.
How do you mean?
You see, well, basically, and I told you, or I don't know if I told you, but there's been 2 home invasions by the American JTF officer Mitch, both in January and in May. And in June 4th of 2015, there was a fatal weapons test. So in his last contact with me before the fatal weapons test, it was clear he expected me not to make it. And he asked me all my banking passwords, which is not something you would ask somebody unless you expected them to die.
What does that mean?
So
what does a fatal weapons test mean exactly?
Okay, so what happens is when an MK Ultra subject becomes progressively injured through PTSD, and they become less useful, and they become more of a liability because they might start trying to seek some compensation or whistleblowing. So what happens is they get graduated to lethal weapons tests. This happened in the concentration camps of World War II. When Dr. Joseph Mengele did his experiments on the twin Jewish children, after they would get injured too much, he'd promote them to fatal weapons tests. And so this is done today in America, in Canada, with MKUltra subjects. So anyway, I got graduated to fatal weapons test first with the scopolamine fog thing in 2014, and then this year, it was on June 4th, it was a medium-length, nicotine-laden liquid heart attack gun.
And you survived it, though?
I survived it due to a tradecraft error. Thankfully, he made one mistake that got my antenna up, that there was a dangerous situation here. And so I didn't follow through the program of what I was supposed to do when I saw him. He had programmed me in the May home invasion as follows. This is what I had to repeat about 10 times. When I see you on the street dressed as a woman, I will recognize you by your same hair and a left hole a big hole below your left knee. As soon as I see you, I will open the sunroof on my car, I will pull over, I will get out, and I will approach you. That was the post-hypnotic suggestion. So this guy dressed in drag, I mean really high-end drag, with sequins in his jacket, and I think he even had fake breasts. And he basically had a really, really tight top on and really, really tight pants. And he was drag walking, like cross-stepping like this. Mm-hmm. And while he's doing, he's swinging this big Coach purse. And in the Coach purse the very back of it's open. I saw this aluminum tube start to lift to the top as he's swinging it. And he saw the tube, and his scowl came on his face, and he tried to stuff the tube down, but he couldn't, right? And that was my trigger. There's something wrong here. And so anyway, I was still in the trance. What happens is when you see the trigger, you go into the trance immediately. So I'm in a hypnotic trance. I'm opening my sunroof. I pull over the car. I open the door, and I just stand right in the middle of the Edith Drive in Toronto with my door open. I won't go to him because I'm sensing danger, and I don't know what's going on. And for 10 seconds, I stood there fighting the mind control. And then I decided, okay, time to abort. And I go to get my seat, and it's covered in liquid. So I wipe the liquid off with my hand, thinking maybe it's just rainwater came in through the sunroof. Then as I sit down, more stuff comes through the sunroof and trickles and lands on my jeans and soaks into my jeans. And then I notice there's a diagonal line of it across the hood. And the diagonal line's coming from the direction where Mitch is behind me, on the 15 feet behind the car. So I go, okay, danger, danger, and I close the sunroof. I go home immediately, 2 blocks, change my jeans, and then I sit down, and of course, being a smoker, what do? You reach for a cigarette. So I go, because I don't know what's going on yet, I have 1 puff of the cigarette, and it doesn't do anything. It's like I'm just sucking air. There's no, as a smoker, what happens is, from your last cigarette, you get a slow reduction in blood level nicotine, your nicotine level in your blood, right? And eventually, when you have that cigarette, you feel the wonderful rush of nicotine coming back up. Well, I felt nothing. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized, oh my God, my whole body's saturated with nicotine right now. Oh, that was a nicotine gun. Holy shit. So then I started doing my Russian martial arts breathing training exercise. Where we know how to direct blood to any point in our body. And so what I did was I directed blood through this directed breathing technique and mental work to my heart. And for the next 20 to 30 minutes, my heart was banging in my chest. I mean, it was like banging, like I've never felt in my life. And it was less than 60 beats per minute. But I managed to get out of having that serious heart attack by just doing the Russian martial arts special breathing. Now, you might ask, why am I studying Russian martial arts?
Well, I can imagine why, but
because I need to defend myself from snatch and grabs.
Right, exactly.
I mean, these near fatal events involve snatch and grabs, and you know, unless you're trained in self-defense, you don't stand a chance, because these guys that are doing this to you are all trained in self-defense, right? Right,
exactly. So I'm really looking forward to reading this book. Where can people learn more about the campaign and how to obviously help in any way?
Sure, great. I would really appreciate it if people would help, because I really need some help, frankly. And The Murder of Time, Making and Unmasking a Sleeper, is actually a crowdsourcing site, a crowdsourcing project at Indiegogo.com. But don't just go to Indiegogo.com, because you'll never find it. What you need to do is just put into Google Murder of Time, Making and Unmasking a Sleeper. And if you put that into Google, you will find right away the first hit will be my crowdsource site. And then you can read all about the book, because I give a really good summary of just the last 14 months, and also a link to my previous documentation on the previous years. So I really appreciate it if people would take a look at that. Again, that's called The Murder of Time, Making and Unmasking a Sleeper.
Great. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today and speaking. And
thank you, Sean.
Hopefully we'll be reading your book very soon.
Very good. I hope so, too. Thank you so much for your time, Sean.
Thank you. Fascinating story there, folks. Believe it or not, these things do happen. And I think by now you've seen some of the episodes on MKUltra, and you understand the real ramifications of it in a person's life from Matthew's story today. This is Sean Stone signing off.